Okay, good morning. We're going to go ahead and get started. I want to respect everyone's time. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jen Brooks. I'm the athletic director at Earthland Academy in St. Louis, Missouri. I'm also the founder of the global community of women in high school sports. Thank you for being on our call today. We are super excited. Our guest today is Dr. Carissa Niehoff. She's the executive director of the National Federation of High School Sports. She is going to give us some ideas of where we are, where we're going in this crazy world of high school sports right now. So, Dr. Niehoff, it is all you.
Oh, thank you, Jen, and really appreciate that you founded this group here and this opportunity, which is super critical right now. And also really appreciate that, as I mentioned earlier, I'm also a St. Louis native, so I'm speaking to someone from home. So thank you for inviting me on. On behalf of the National Federation, I just want to bring wishes that you all are doing well, that your families are well, and that you're looking forward to returning to activities in your respective schools and areas of employment. As Jen said, I'd love to give you, as quickly as I can initially, just kind of a picture as to what's going on nationwide in terms of high school sports. And whenever I say high school sports, right alongside, hand in hand, are other co-curricular activities. The National Federation of State High School Associations does in fact write the rules for 17 of the sports that you all play or involved in, but we also are the national resource for speech, debate, music, and theater, and academic competitions like Quiz Bowl, although those are kind of often overshadowed by the athletic energy that's out there. But so I'll speak about co-curricular activities, and when I'm talking about sports and returning to activity, please keep in the back of your mind those activities as well. But essentially, the National Federation has 51 member associations, 50 states that each have their own association, and then Washington, D.C. And of course, they belong to our organization. That we are a federation by design, not an association like the NCAA. So whereas the NCAA has a little bit more direct oversight and there's a stronger accountability for consistency, being a federation, it allows for state associations and of course then member high schools to do things differently and implement programs in ways, regulations and bylaws in ways that are more aligned with the situation in that particular state. With all that being said, there is still tremendous consistency across the country with what happens and what is happening in high school athletics right now. The NFHS, working with states, we're really doing a couple of things directly with states and then a few other things that are just overall to support returning kids back to activity. First and foremost, we are engaged in collaborative relationships with a number of different sport organizations, from professional teams and leagues like the NFL to national governing bodies to the USOPC to other universities and high school institutions like the NIAAA. So a number of people coming together, even youth sport organizations. And there are a number of forums, task forces, and panels that are meeting on a regular basis, and I think doing good work, a lot of discussion right now, but we're kind of on the precipice of identifying really what the best practices are about getting kids back to play. We are also working with our legislators and our folks in DC and our colleagues' legislative efforts around strong support for any legislation that backfills education funding. We know that for high school co-curricular experiences, we need to have education budgets that are at least maintained. Love to see them all robust, but we know that's not the reality. So we're really pushing for legislation that focuses on education funding so that our co-curricular experiences can be funded as well as best as possible. A couple of things that we're really working closer with in terms of our state associations and schools, and you may be more interested, in fact, in these things, a little more boots on the ground, but we've issued a guidance document for returning to activity. We are engaged in a research study with 2 universities around aerosol and the spread of respiratory droplets in a number of different activities, from talking to singing to playing a wind instrument to breathing hard after coming off of a treadmill. We're looking at elementary kids through adults. And then we are also looking at rules modifications in our sports that may be a 1-year only kind of thing. Maybe they should be permanent based on this kind of new reality that is COVID-19 or any other kind of viral spread, even the flu. So again, we're really working on collaboration. We're working on support for legislation. We've issued a guidance document, and then we're looking at rules modifications as we speak. With those 4 things in place, I'll just give you a little bit of a picture of where state associations are, and then I'll circle back to the guidance document and talk a little bit about what that says and how that compares to other guidance that is out there. And without putting you all to sleep, I'll pause then and see if there are any immediate questions or any coaching from the chat room if questions are happening there. But right now, most of our states are planning to go back in the fall in some form or fashion, certainly in a modified situation. Back in early to mid-March, when the COVID-19 crisis escalated really rapidly, many of our states suspended schools, suspended activities. We went home from our office in Indianapolis on Friday the 13th, and we're still not back. So we have another week to go. The NCAA is not back until June 15th. But right away, we realized that there was a cancellation of winter championships in most states. There was likely going to be a cancellation of spring. So we wanted to get a handle on the health and wellness of our state associations. What were their start-stop dates for activities, and what was the fiscal impact going to be? On April 1st, most of our states had not yet canceled spring sports, but they had canceled winter. And on April 1st, our states reported that the losses they anticipated would be anywhere from $150,000 to over $2 million just from canceling winter championships. Most canceled spring. In fact, almost all, with the exception of Iowa, which plays softball and baseball in the summer, and they're up and running. So our state associations, I would say about a dozen of them, if they don't have fall sport championships, will likely have to burn through any kind of reserves, and some will even have to look elsewhere for funding and support. So they're very concerned, and likewise our high schools are concerned. If school budgets are getting cut anywhere from 20 to 50%, which is kind of what we're hearing, it's very likely that co-curricular experiences such as sports could be on that chopping block. And I said to Jen before we started the call, if you ask a superintendent of schools right now, what's football going to be like? They're probably going to do this because they're just worried about getting kids back to school. We're hearing that likely in most places a hybrid of some sort of in-person learning will be the answer. Not the best answer, but the answer. Because with social distancing needing to happen and a set number of school buses and certain class sizes, they're going to need to look at staggered scheduling. They're going to need to look at staggered school times and bus runs, and even look at which kids are in the building for what reasons. So we hear a lot about a hybrid where kids that come into the building for in-person learning are really there for supporting courses that they may struggle in, whereas kids that are doing well with some autonomy may continue in the online format. All of those kinds of conversations are just tornado kinds of spinning right now, with mid to late August fast approaching. Then we also have to appreciate the level of emotional readiness that exists for families, for kids, for communities. What if families say, I'm just not ready to go back? Teachers are going to have to execute online and in person. And what a massive lift that is for educators and schools. And then certainly we have to talk honestly about socioeconomic resources and the gap that's already there, where the stronger divergence will take place in areas that are under-resourced, perhaps being further under-resourced. And what does that do to access to opportunity for kids that arguably need opportunity the most in those areas. So a lot of conversation is happening within schools and at the state association level about what it's going to look like going back and the many challenges that exist. And so that's kind of where things are spinning in the high school ecosystem with regard to sport. The guidance that we have shared with state associations in regards to high school return may look a little bit more conservative than what we're seeing in youth soccer or youth volleyball or some of our national governing bodies that are focused on one particular sport and, we'll say it, are very revenue driven. Their guidance is bringing kids back to full field, full court play sooner than our guidance would suggest. Our guidance was developed by our Sports Medicine Advisory Committee, which includes a multitude of areas of expertise, from orthopedic surgeons to pediatricians to neuropsychologists to athletic trainers, all sorts of sports medicine specialists, as well as state association staff who can speak practically about the business of schools. But they worked quickly and did thorough research, looking at CDC guidelines, looking at USOPC guidelines, and other guidelines that are there to produce this document. We present that document to anyone in Word format. Feel free to take it, use what pieces work for you, and make whatever parts of that document your own. And that's what we said to state, so they're doing that. What we will say is that, first and foremost, we recommend that wherever you are, you work first with your governor's office, with your state health agencies, with your state education agencies, to see what the situation is in your state. Because obviously their leadership and their oversight is critical. So in our guidance document, we talk about really the COVID-19, our language being grounded in not so much contact on surfaces, much more so the risk of transmission and contagion through respiratory droplet spread. We talk a little bit about what the virus is, how it spreads, high-risk groups versus what we're just starting to learn about young people. And then we talk about activities, and we have loosely categorized sports in 3 different tiers of risk: higher risk, more moderately risk, and lower risk. It's easy to look at like a wrestling or 11-player tackle football and say, yeah, that's probably easy. Put that up in the higher risk. In the more moderate risk, we have your field sports, soccer, field hockey, maybe volleyball. And then the lower risk, pretty easy to think, well, maybe golf, tennis, staggered cross country, perhaps staggered lanes for swimming or diving. And then you get murky when you look at sports like basketball. When our guidance came out, it shows basketball as a more moderately risk of transmission sport. Well, I immediately said, wait a minute. I was a post player in high school. I would put that sport higher. And I asked our Sports Med Advisory Committee, well, why is basketball in the middle and girls lacrosse is in the middle, but boys lacrosse is in the higher? And they really did their best to say, we worked in alignment with USOPC kind of tiers and their definitions, and what would be perceived to be the amount of time spent more face-to-face or in physical presence of breath. You know, personally, I'd still argue basketball needs to go up, but our guidance is not set in stone, and the more we learn, perhaps from our aerosol study, you'll see an adjustment in that document. And our Sports Med Advisory Committee has no ego in this at all. So we welcome your questions about that. We also talk about phases of returning to activity. Probably familiar to you all at this point. Initially, no locker rooms, no shared hydration stations, no traditional full-scale practices, scrimmages, certainly competitions, no sharing of equipment. coming to practice, staying in small groups of kids in pods, remaining in that pod for a while, and talking about sort of the gated kinds of criteria. So 2 weeks without increase, preferably decrease in contagion in your state, certainly no incidences in your programs, then maybe moving to the next phase. But phase 2 is similar to phase 1 for us. It's just an increasing number of gatherings, still no locker rooms, maybe sharing of some equipment, but tremendous efforts to sanitize equipment before and after use. Still no shared hydration, and still no competition. That would cross town lines. It's only getting to phase 3 that you'll start to see a return to what would be normalcy there. Significant to if these phases can move forward is the ability to do on-site, or what we call point of care testing. So whether it's your office or your facility, your field, your school, is there the capacity to test, and probably just with the non-touch thermometer, participants and coaches and anyone involved with the program? If that resource is there, fantastic. Obviously, part of the resources are the educational components that take place with participants, with parents, with staff, even with facilities maintenance, anybody involved in the periphery of that program. And then certainly an action plan for what happens if there is someone that demonstrates symptoms or in fact does test positive for COVID. So a lot of that is all about resources to actually implement phase 1 and monitor the program going into phases 2 and 3. A big question we get is, well, what about masks? And we recommend in our guidance that adults, coaches, officials should be in a cloth mask whenever possible, unless there's a health risk. Officials might be sprinting or something and they can't breathe. For student participants, if possible, maybe in chalk talks or stretching or low exertion activity, wear a cloth mask. And obviously social distancing is key at all times when possible. But if there's an exertion issue or a health risk issue, take the mask off. Certainly don't share the mask. But a lot of those things are, and you know, the last thing I'll kind of comment on here is, I mentioned to Jen, was I think we all, no matter who we are or what we do or what level we're at, we're going to need to scratch our heads a little bit and have a good conversation about this new tolerance for ambiguity when it comes to COVID-19 and risk mitigation. Where is common sense meeting caution? And I'll use the analogy about why we have speed limits for driving, because we have sport rules that mitigate risk all the time. We require equipment. We can't, beat on people with our sticks. And so we allow you to take a risk in sport, and we know you're going to get hurt maybe. So when we drive in a car, we know that if you drive too fast, your risk of getting hurt goes up. So we're not going to make you drive 10 miles per hour, but we're not going to let you drive 100 miles per hour. If you're in a flat state, maybe you can drive 70 because you can go off the road and get back on. You probably don't know. But in New England, we only go 55, 65. So, more seriously, really, we mitigate risk in a car. So with COVID, we know now there's a new risk. So how much common sense can we apply knowing that there's a risk that this virus will be there and spread with the horrible incubation period that it has? And what are we going to tolerate as we start to come back to activity? As we start to watch youth sports come back, full guns in some places, I wonder about false starts. And is our tolerance for ambiguity, is that going to be challenged in those situations? Because I think the worst thing we could do for sport from an engagement perspective, from a revenue perspective, from a sport as an institution perspective, is go out too soon and have to stop again. Because that, for schools in particular, is going to really hurt kids. And for programs that rely on sport for revenue, it's going to really challenge their physical integrity. And right now, we need sport as an institution more than ever. When we talk about what's going on in our society with race relations, and we talk about what happens in a locker room when we put on the same uniform and we're on a team. What can sport do to be a leader? When we talk about some of the other things that I think we're at a turning point now, and if we don't turn in the right direction now, our society may lose our opportunities in the future. So I just have been on a bit of a soapbox there. And Jen, folks, thank you for allowing me to share a little bit about the high school landscape. I'd love to pause now and just invite any questions, comments, concerns, or Jen, what's most appropriate for your group and your agenda?
Yeah, if you have a question, put it in the chat, or you can raise your hand or holler out. There is a question in the chat right now. It says, to what degree should there be any concern or restrictions about the virus spreading through balls, such as playing catch with a softball or a football?
Great question, because obviously that's how sports happen when we want to play them as they're supposed to be played. We have learned since the beginning of this thing that contact on surfaces is not the primary concern. And we've even learned that sunlight can actually help to eradicate the virus fairly quickly. So in our guidance document, we talk about trying not to share equipment whenever possible. Does that mean you don't kick a soccer ball back and forth? Maybe not so much there, but if you are in fact playing catch with a baseball or a softball, making sure that that ball is sanitized before you use it, and that if it's two of you sharing the ball, you put that down, you hand sanitize the ball again before someone else picks it up. Bat checks, stick checks. Football is a little more risky just because of the nature of the game, the ball getting passed, maybe multiple players in contact in a drill. I think it's less risk than the aerosol, certainly. But if at all possible, we're saying that perhaps getting kids back to sport, if there's a way to do practice drills with your own equipment, try that first. And if you get through a couple of weeks, kids are doing well, move to sharing, and just make sure you've got sanitizing mechanisms there. One of the things we are talking about, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention this, is looking at conditioning. A lot of our kids have not been in weight rooms for 3 months. So we want to pay attention to coming back to your more aerobic kinds of sports, certainly football, cross country, where there might be pads involved too. Are our kids needing more preseason conditioning? And maybe during that time, for those 2 weeks, maybe you can move through phase 1 without increase, certainly decrease would be great, and move into sharing equipment a little sooner. A little bit of a long answer there, but those first 2 weeks are really important.
Yeah, great. Another question, what are you hearing about other states talking about switching seasons to play more distance-friendly sports in the fall?
Yeah, great question. And maybe the question's coming from someone who lives in a warm climate that might be year-round. Maybe not. But we are hearing in some states that, and I'll use an example, Texas, where football is, well, everything's huge in Texas, but football is especially large and a real revenue generator for schools. There is some conversation in Texas about whether or not to start that season, maybe December or January. Maybe get them back to practicing on a more regular schedule, but let them condition a little longer and get an abbreviated season in and start some tournament kinds of things or competitive things maybe a little later. I asked the executive director in another East Coast state, have you talked about this? And he said, if we were to move baseball and softball, which are spring in this particular state, to the fall, he said, we'd be hurting those kids twice. and we don't want to do that just for our own revenue purposes. So states are all over the place, but I will say that the most common thing we're hearing now is abbreviated seasons. Get them back, get them conditioning, phase them in, get maybe fewer games on a schedule, get through whatever a tournament might look like, and then have a full 2-week hiatus between fall and winter. And you all know basketball tends to overlap. That's just a season that we never want to end, right? So, so we're hearing states talking about 2 weeks off, no sports, no contact in between seasons, for better or worse, so that there is some creativity being applied.
Okay. You mentioned rules modifications. Can you give us an example or two of what some modifications may be?
Absolutely. I apologize for not going back to that sooner. So each of our rules editors on our staff have been meeting for the last 3 weeks, and they have been charged with looking at the NFHS rules codes, all of our rules publications, and digging as deep as they can into those rules codes to see if there are things that could be problematic to getting kids back. For example, in volleyball, at some point in the match, teams switch benches. Well, that doesn't impact how the game is played, but that's something we may want to say, you know what, next year, maybe we don't switch benches, don't need to sanitize benches for another team. How are officials' behaviors happening? Are mechanics different? Are locations on a field different? Are captains' meetings different? Are checks of equipment different? Do we not sit the whole team in the dugout? And do we have safe seating behind or somewhere else where kids can be protected but not in the dugout? So it's those kinds of implementation. Some of them are more administrative rules, but there could be actually some playing codes that we might get away from. Certainly we're not going to be looking at shaking hands, high five, some of those things which are common sense. But are there things that we will be changing? And just this week, our rules editors are reaching the end. I know our volleyball, gymnastics is talking about virtual competitions at first. Swimming and diving, they're pretty okay. They're looking at staggering lanes. And then some of our other sports are still working, but by the end of the week, we hope, in fact, our next rules review meeting is tomorrow at 10. So we should have it finalized, we hope, by the end of the week, and then out to our states next week.
Great. Awesome. Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions or thoughts or comments for Dr. Niehoff before we let her go here?
Jen, I have a question. It's Rebecca.
Hey, Rebecca.
Carissa, thank you for being with us today. I'm from Seattle. You talked earlier about like club sports, and their return is going to be probably much sooner due to them being like more revenue based. How is we as athletic directors, because we're going to have people who play club sports and then want to play soccer, how can we, how can we handle that with those families in our communities that are like, well, my club volleyball team's playing, why aren't you back at school? So like maybe some advice and some guidance on how to handle that.
Great question, Rebecca. And had another call with a group of ADs just last week and from around the country, and they share those concerns. The school program is going to kind of be put in this position where, we look different. And I'll tell you, I think to be a little more conservative right now, if you're going to be on one side of the issue or the other, be a little more conservative, I think is the way to go. I would say work with your school administration so that they have your back, and work with your superintendent. I think they will be supportive of being more conservative because they're going to have issues about classroom space and contained environments that you'll have for volleyball or gym practices and other things that you're offering. So I would say if you have a state sport medicine advisory council, and you do in all 50 states, and your executive director, Mick Hoffman, is an awesome, awesome guy. work with him to see if there's maybe working together on a statement that can be supportive of your AD's association. If you have one in Washington, what's unique to Washington schools? How are we working together? And is there something you can have prepared for parents in the preseason meetings that, hey gang, we are going to look different, and probably we look different now. Our Sports Med Advisory Council advises this. The NFHS encourages us to hold the course until we have evidence that it's time to move through phase one. We want to be evidence-based and careful. We don't want to have to stop again. And, you know, with schools, you have an easier way to contact trace. So, you know, youth sports could say, and maybe there's some truth to it. We don't know where these kids go after they leave us, and they may not. But in schools, you kind of have a greater liability for that because you can contact trace a little better. So there's a little bit more liability just based on what we know, based on our environments that are different. It's not just that soccer is soccer. Youth and recreation is different from education-based, from a geographical and logistical perspective. I think you have a lot there for an argument that's a good one, to be more conservative. I hope that helps.
It definitely does. Brenda raised her hand. Brenda, what's your question?
Well, okay, I'm 100 miles north of Rebecca in a rural area, and our biggest issue right now is selling to our community the whole conservative approach, because these kids are all together every other minute of the day, basically, except for when they come to school. Well, they're not really coming to school right now, but we're telling them that they can't get together, and yet they're down at the river in groups of, you know, over 50. They are at graduation parties. They are at family gatherings. They are getting together at the local park and participating. So in many ways, you know, we're doing our due diligence, but at the same time, the kids look at us and say, hey, we're together. And we haven't had a spike, and we haven't had issues in our community. And I think that's the difference between rural and a close-knit community and the bigger city. So how do we handle that?
Great question, Brenda. So they're out there doing their captain's practices, right? That we don't know exist. And, but it's true. I mean, you drive around here in Indianapolis, and it was a beautiful weekend. You see families out there and, you know, pick up flag football or Frisbee, and they're doing it. And that's where your local community, working with your local, state and local health agencies, they perhaps can offer you support for personalized kinds of criteria. Because you're right. In Montana, I believe, in some places, they actually re-engage kids in in-person education. So you may be in a place where you can do it. And you know what, honestly, if you can do it and you've got support in your community and your school district says, we're not seeing a spike, in fact, we're seeing a decline, let's give it a whirl. And we've got all the safeguards in place. So when kids cross from non-school to your environment, there's support to do that. You're gonna monitor them, test them, give it a shot, phase them in. We need some good stories. So if you can do it and you've got support, and it's not just pressure on the school to do it, and the school feels like it has to cave, you should not be in this decision alone. But we fully appreciate that in some places of the country, that you'll be able to go back sooner than others. And that's normal. We anticipate that.
Great, thank you. Anybody else have any questions for Dr. Niehoff? Question in the box, in the chat box. Are any of the rules at professional and college sports looking at going to work down to high school sports? For instance, splash shields for football face masks. These are questions coming from their community.
Yep, so we talked with our Sports Medicine Advisory Committee about like the shield for football. And as you all well know, our rules are very tightly tied to ASTM and NOCSI standards. And right now, the high school level will not be approving the use of face shields in football because the helmet then would not be NOCSI certified, as the face shield is a separate part. This type of face shield And it's certainly not designed to prevent. A traditional football face protection is not designed to prevent virus spread. The shield that is not going to be able to certify the helmet that's still Nazi certified. So high school level, you won't see that kind of an example. But again, we're one of the rules we're looking at, I'll just tell you whether it's COVID or not, we're really working hard on the field hockey goggles. So if anybody's on the call from the East, you know, we're working for you on that. I think we have good momentum. Stay tuned. But, you know, we're not looking at protective equipment being a part of rules relative to COVID. We're looking at the wearing of cloth masks, you know, where possible, and that's about it. But we know when kids are going full out in sport, they're going to feel like I can't breathe really well. And when it's hot, that could be a problem. So take them off.
Great. Anybody else? Any last questions or comments? All right. Dr. Niehoff, thank you so much for being a part of our call. It was very informative. And we know you're busy, so we really appreciate you taking time to spend with us today.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, I really appreciate it. I stand ready to answer any questions that we didn't get to. And feel free to email them either through Jen or contact us directly. I'd love to stay on the call just to listen to what's going on, if that's okay, Jen.
Yeah, absolutely. We just have a couple more things we're going to chat about real quick, and then we'll move on.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Be well.
Thank you. All right. So my question to you all is, how is your summer shaping up? So I threw a poll out there. Let's launch it right now. So when does your school plan on offering workouts or practices on your campus? Can you see it, Rebecca? Yep. Okay. So are you open now? Are you having practices not until June 15th, July 1st, August 1st? You plan to stay closed? Take another minute to complete this, and I'd like to see where everybody's at, and then let's chat about that. All right, we're going to go ahead and end the poll in 3, 2, 1, end. And here's your results. So right now, 37% closed for the foreseeable future. So I'd like to hear, you know, for those who are closed, where are you from and why are you staying closed? And then for those of you that are open, where are you from and how are you opening and what does that look like? So shout it out, put it in the chat. I'd love to hear you chat verbally though. Carolyn, you raise your hand.
Hello, yes, our school budget is just shot. We were the only school in our league in San Francisco who, that wasn't even to honor the spring coaches' contracts. And then I'm transitioning out of the program. So I have to also train our new athletic director in terms of even advocating for the survival of our programs altogether. So, and right now we don't have anyone at the table in those conversations. And so it looks kind of bleak for us. And yet I think I don't think I'm unusual in that, to be honest, at least in my context here in the Bay Area.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for sharing. Anybody else? Let's hear what you're thinking, what you're doing in your state. You're throwing it in the chat. I'd love to hear you say it out loud. Suzanne, you raised your hand.
Hi, how are you?
Good, thanks.
Good. I see there's a lot of Washington ADs, and I think we are really in a pause because we're waiting for our governor and our Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction to give us guidance before we can start. The most frustrating part is that they've opened up recreational, they just opened up pools, and so we own a pool in our district, and so I'm going to be able to open up that, but I'm not going to be able to let my athletes go in it. Seems really, it's just really confusing. So hopefully we'll get some guidance soon, but we've been waiting a few weeks, and we're got stuff for professional sports. We got stuff for youth sports. We just don't have anything for our athletes, which is sad.
Yeah, thanks for sharing.
Another thing we're hearing in Washington is our Washington State Risk Management Group has made the statement that schools are not to do anything until the governor lifts. And so even if a school in our state decided to start offering something because they're in phase 3, the risk management for the state of Washington is saying not to. So I think they're kind of, they're really giving some direction to our member schools.
That's great stuff. Thank you. I'll say in St. Louis, most of the schools here are waiting until July 1st, and then we'll open up and do some small workouts. At least that's the plan for now, but it could change because our numbers are spiking. There's a lot going on in the chat. 2 participants raised their hands, but it doesn't tell me who you are, so go ahead and go for it.
Hey, Jen, this is Lisa Langston in Texas. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I'm sorry I left my laptop at home. We're social distancing, so I'm working the mornings at home, and then I come to the office in the afternoon. In Texas, many of the districts around me, I'm in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. I'm actually in Fort Worth, but many of the school districts around us have already started this week, this Monday. But I'm in a district with 16 high schools, and that's a little larger to manage. And so what we're doing right now is just going through each one of our 16 high schools, going through their plans and going out and having a walk through to see exactly what what we're going to do, from the pre-screening of the kids driving up to hydration, what they're going to do in the weight room, and making sure everybody has the PPE kits and everything that they need. I went on a walkthrough yesterday. Great plan by one of our coaches as far as he wants to keep everybody outside, and we're just doing plate work. Have a plan for the hydration, the restrooms. I mean, every little detail we're going through, because, for us, we know that this is about optics, and also this will be a lens in which our superintendents can look through as far as the planning for the educational return in the fall. And our school district did put out a survey to parents to see as far as a school schedule, if they wanted the breaks that Clarissa talked about, or if they want a traditional schedule. And the survey came back that the parents and all the stakeholders voted for that traditional. So we're hopeful in Texas. In fact, something came out yesterday that we increased from 25% occupancy in the indoor facilities to 50%. So as we get ready to start in our district on Monday, we already see a change to our plan.
Yeah. Great. Thank you for sharing. Somebody else raised their hand. Okay. Well, I encourage you to check out the chat box. There's lots of things going on in the chat box. Here we go. This one is: recognizing the current climate of our country, are there any tools athletic directors are looking to use to support their coaches in navigating tough conversations? How are you looking to protect coaches? A wrestling coach was recently let go because of insensitive posts on social media. And actually, that brings me to my next thought process. My next thought is, how are you planning without knowing what to plan for, navigating the unknown? And that question, I think, kind of goes right in there, So it's more philosophical. I feel like that's all we're doing right now, is the big what ifs and thinking about this and having a plan A, a B, a C, and a D, and then tomorrow all those plans change again. So I'd like to hear from the group here. What are your coping strategies? What are you thinking? What are you planning for? How are you planning for it? Any tips or tricks? And then any thoughts to his question? Three participants raised their hand, but I can't see who you are, so go for it.
Hey, Jen, Mike McGurk, Kansas City, Missouri. In answer to the question, one of the things that we've done already, because we have our kids coming back to do conditioning on Monday, is we had a coaches meeting via Zoom, because they're going to be the first group of adults back working with our kids during this time, and had some really good dialogue. We had some Black coaches who took the lead, and a lot of our white coaches just wanted to listen. They wanted to know what they should do, what they can do to embrace and support our Black athletes, work with our teams as they come back, and with follow-up dialogue. Many of the coaches appreciated having a forum that was non-threatening, where they could have some commentary and some questions answered from the leaders within their own group. So in regards to the question that came up, that's kind of what we were doing to try to support coaches.
Great, thanks, Mike. All right, 2 other people had their hands raised. Nobody? So you're all just like me and still trying to figure all this out, huh? No tips and tricks?
Hey, Jen, I have zero tricks nor tips. I know I reached out to our health department this morning and said, hey, the initial plan for the next phase for our county is the 15th, which is Monday. You know, I'd like to kind of have a heads up so I can start crafting how we're going to go and what we're going to do so we can get with the coaches. And the response was, yeah, we'll have something out this week. So what I found in this recent time is that we've always dealt in unpredictability and you know, thinking on our feet, and it has taken this job to a new level during this mess. So it's pretty frustrating.
Yes, very frustrating, especially for the type A personality that I am, and I like to have everything planned out. It's not happening. I'm growing as a person. I'm finding the good in this.
Yeah.
Somebody else raised their hand.
Hey, Jen, this is Brenda Terpstra again from Linden, Washington. One of the frustrations, concerns, challenges that we're finding is, as we're working with 9 other private schools across the nation with forming a plan for reopening school in the fall, is you plan to buy PPE stuff or different kinds of, you know, protection barriers, whatever. What if you don't need them? And then you have the outlay of money. Basically, you have a warehouse full of hula hoops. So what do you do with that? And I think probably every athletic director is feeling this as well. I think I'm more tired right now, and I have not supervised one spring event, but all the different plans is I'm ready for a break.
Yes, I keep saying I've worked harder right now than I have in my career, and we're not playing any games. It doesn't make any sense. Yeah. Anybody have any thoughts for that excess PPE if we have it?
It's Carolyn again in San Francisco. We'll take some. If you know, share the wealth if you want. We're not even going to have a budget, I think, for PPE, or the very small sports budget will be directed to that. So that I anticipate that the rationale on our campus is that we won't be able to have some sports because of that added cost for implementation this year. So that's really what I've been fighting for is the advocacy. And maybe that's why I'm tired, right? Because it's that those things that are not directly related to our athletes is what, for me, I've been spending so much of my advocacy work this spring. And it was always there anyway, as an undersourced program, right? We all take that on already in just the way that sports is positioned in many of our contexts, right? That it's extra, that it's ancillary to like academics or something. So the fight, I think, has always been there, right? The advocacy has always been there. It's just a little different now. And now we have layered onto that our current context of racial justice and the intersectionality of all that. And then the very little thing that I could do, which was I gave PE credit to all of our students because that was the only power that I had. So I assigned PE credit for practicing social distancing. I assigned PE credit for going to a protest of their choice or having some sort of advocacy in whatever way they could do, if it's writing letters, if it's talking to people, and I gave credit for that. That's the only, I think that's the only way that I could deal with my own restraint around these issues and these intersectionalities and what it means to be in a high school educational setting. And with that, also being very busy with looking to those spaces in our educational settings where I could also learn and be fortified. And so like reimagining schools, a lot of the Zen education sources that I've gone to, and those are the ones that I've been forwarding to my coaches. And how do we really look at our student athletes as people first, right? As people first with specific needs first, and then add on, layer on our responsibility to them as sports coaches, as skills educators. So I've been, there's a lot of rich information about that, but it's a way of doing things. It's a methodology that the coaches, I think, also are looking for. And I think, at least in my context, because I'm at a Catholic school, a lot of my coaching staff, there's a hesitance to be able to do that. And that's where they need a lot of guidance. And we do that together, because I don't know half the time either. Because I'm, sometimes I feel like I got to chase the money, right? And where I want to look at the kids and what they're doing. So there's a lot of stuff out there. And also, I love having these conversations with people. So any of you on here, we could take it offline and we could talk. And I'm always happy to be with you all as we all do the work together.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else have any thoughts, comments about this unknown?
Jen, this is Missy Townsend from Prescott, Arizona. I just wanted to give you guys a little update on what's happening here in Arizona, because we did open, our state opened for June 1st. So most high schools here in Arizona have started summer workouts. Our state association issued a 13-page guideline for how schools can slowly phase back in. They have a phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 process. And it's very much in line with what the NFHS sent out, and with the CDC, and as well as America's rephasing opening. What's kind of been interesting, what I've found so far, is the need to do the thermometer testing. That's actually where I've spent the most money right now, is getting a hold of some of the contactless thermometers to check each of our athletes and coaches. Phase 1, we have 10 athletes in a cohort at a time with our coaches. And we make sure and do like a health screening before we start. It takes 15-30 seconds to do each kid. It's really fast. But the plan is after 2 weeks of phase 1, where everyone's healthy and we're not having any issues or seeing anybody get sick, then we can move into phase 2, which is to increase the numbers of people at the same time. And phase 1, there's no shared equipment, whereas in phase 2 there is. But you keep the same cohorts together. You keep the monitoring and the tracking of their health, and hope that process will go in. I kind of like how our state's done it, because while our state association came out with these guidelines to follow, it's up to each district in each area. You know, in Prescott, we're a rural area north of Phoenix, and we don't have the same level of cases as other places in our state have. So it's really up to each school district to assess, with the help of their county health departments, to determine if they feel like it's safe. But I've been impressed with how great the athletes have been with, you know, they've been wearing their masks when they're in close proximity to each other, but if they're social distancing, then or working out, then they're able to take those masks off, with the coaches keeping theirs on. They haven't fought it at all. And it made me realize that, you know, 4 or 5 months ago, there's no way you could have gotten all these kids to do this, you know, to wear masks, to follow protocols going in without having some pushback. But these kids want to get back to playing sports, and they're willing to do whatever the new normal is. They're willing to get their temperature tested, even if they don't even particularly agree with it. And so are the families. We have every kid having to sign a waiver, and it's been actually a lot smoother than I thought it would be. But it did my heart good to see those kids out on that field this week and in the gym. So hopefully, fingers crossed, that we'll be able to keep slowly building and adding to it. But just kind of hopefully wanted to share some of those thoughts with everybody.
Yeah, no, that's great insight. Thank you very much for sharing. So anything else? Anybody want to talk about anything else? I don't want to take up too much more of your time. Okay. Well, we are going to meet again on June 24th. We've got Peg Pennypacker. We have Title IX changes coming up, and she's going to talk to us about these important Title IX changes. And then we also are going to have Susan Sullivan. She's the founder of the Women's Sports Film Festival, and she will be on our call as well to chat about that. So I'm pretty excited about that. So until June 24th, I'm going to share with you my contact information. Here's how to get a hold of me. And Rebecca's on the call as well. She's my friend and helper here. Reach out to either of us. We're happy to help out anybody along the way. Until June 24th, keep breathing, everyone. Have a great 2 weeks.
Thank you. Thanks, Jen.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Carissa.